Hello and welcome to this video in which we're looking at quite a fun little project this time, RC vehicles in 00 scale on the cheap. Because normally getting all the RC equipment and so on to fit something this small is quite an expensive endeavour. Also tends to be fairly fiddly to set up steering systems properly and all that kind of thing, and miniature gearboxes. So we're looking at doing it the cheap, easy way. The results won't be quite as good as doing it the proper way, but they're still pretty fun to play with. So as you can see here, we've got a tiny little RC car. This is a reasonably cheap Chinese made kind of thing. And all we're going to do is transplant the chassis from this into something a bit more scale. So if we have a closer look at our little mini vehicle, quite literally, we can see it's got head and tail lights that stay on permanently. We can see it's got a proportional steering system which works reasonably well. We've got proportional throttle as well. This is not the little cheap tiny Coke can cars that you get that just have sort of on and off throttle and on and off steering. This is actually reasonably controllable. So what we're going to do is take the chassis off this and stick it under the closest thing I could find in 1/76 scale, which in this instance happens to be a VW T25 van. So let's see how we get on. Just before we go any further, I thought we'd have a look at the donor vehicle in question. This is called a Turbo Racing 1/76 proportional RC car. If you type something approximating that into Google, then it will come up with various Chinese wholesaler type websites where you can get these. There are a couple of UK stockers, so I recommend those if you can, because then you won't necessarily run into some of the customs issues you might do if you get it from a Chinese place. But in all, this was £45, and although it is a bit highly geared, I think it's not too bad for that. That gets you the controller as well, and a charge cable and a couple of spare bodies. It's time for my favourite bit of any project, which is dismantling stuff. The chassis from the car just clips out. So we've got a little cheap die-cast body with some paint on the inside to stop the light coming through from the headlights. And then we have the actual interesting bit, which is actually really quite a neat design. There's a PCB with all the controls and so on along the top. And I think I'm going to cover that up with some electrical tape before I go any further, so it doesn't short on anything while I'm trying to put it into this van. Speaking of, the Oxford die-cast van, other companies are available and so on and so forth, comes apart with just one screw. Then we have a chassis, which we don't need, an interior, which we don't need most of, and the shell itself, with plenty of space inside. So, actually I'm going to take that out first. One point to note is that you don't have to use a T25. If you excuse me a moment, I will go and find the other option. So, one of the other options, well, anything that has roughly a 98-inch wheelbase or a 2.5 metre wheelbase will work. Well, might work. That's the right wheelbase you need for this anyway. It's 33mm to scale. I did also try an Audi Quattro at one point before settling on the T25, but there's not quite enough space in the front here, as the mini body shell is a little bit higher at the front for some of this electronics. Mid-build update. Got our little driver figure in here now. I'm just going to hope that no one notices it's a left-hand drive van. I've taken the load divider that was on the back of this piece. So you can see here there was a little load divider thingy. Taken that off and glued it in the back there so you can't see the battery through the back window. So next jobs are drill out the front and rear lights, which is going to be tricky. I've got a 1mm and a 1.5mm drill bit for that, and to put in some areas to support the chassis. Now luckily when you drop that in there, that is pretty much exactly the right height to sit on the front of this circuit board here, so that's perfect. So I need to add something similar to that to the back here, and I'm basically going to build up layers of 0.5mm card until that reaches the right height. Sorry, that's plastic card, and I have some normal cardboard type card to go down the sides here. If I just drop that in for a second, you can see we have a little bit of a gap down the side here, and I want to use card for this just so it can compress very slightly and hopefully the chassis will hold in just by the compression of that card, and I won't have to use screw mounts or glue or anything to hold it in place. So there we go, that's what I've got to get on with. Time for another update. It's looking alright, isn't it? I still need to do something about the lights, because at the moment it just looks like it's got neons rather than head or tail lights. But I've drilled out the two holes in the back. Hopefully if I get this at the right angle you can see there is actually light coming out of there. So I'm going to put some glazing glue type stuff in there, which hopefully will make it a little more obvious. Same on the front. I used a 0.7mm drill on the back in the end, and a 1.5 on the fronts, and a centre punch to mark all the holes beforehand, because it was wandering around a little bit on the back. Yeah, for the lights I need to block out a lot of this space underneath and inside as well, because it looks like there's a red light going on in there. Don't know what sort of activity that suggests in the van like this, but anyway. Of course, there we go. The steering almost works. So you can see here when I'm turning this way, it's catching just on this corner here. So I need to grind away a little bit on the inside corners there. I'll do both sides and the backs as well. But we do have currently a working-ish 00 scale VW van that stops every time I try and turn left because that wheel's catching. So a little bit more painting, a little bit more refining, but we're nearly there. So the project's finally done. I brought it back out to the test track to sum up. Seems to run pretty smoothly now. I've added some oil to the gears and added a little bit of lead weight inside the body. This control on the controller also allows you to limit the top speed, which helps control it. The lights I don't think worked out particularly well. I may try and improve that with fibre optic cable in the future. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. Given that it cost me about £55 in total, 45 for the chassis, 5 for the body. That's not a bad way to get into remote control in 1:76 scale.